Crisis is the center of leadership. If you didn't have good leadership, crisis takes over. So what are the essential elements? First of all, under the circumstances where the very nature of the institution is being threatened or questioned, purpose. What is the purpose of this institution? The same purpose that you had before? A different purpose? Has the crisis led to a different structure and configuration of the markets or communities? So that clarification of purpose is critical. And I have to say many leaders are not even conscious of that. They're almost trying to take the organization back to where it was. And there you will see an organization that may survive for a short while, may then, once the crisis is over, survive not too long. So statement one, purpose. Do you understand the purpose? What is the nature of the markets? How have they changed? How do you sell the message? The second, and this is an often not discussed issue, is structures. What sort of structures does this organization need to have to be able to harness resources? Most people think leadership is about people. It is, but it is also about how you organize resources so that you can get more from those assets, get greater value from those assets. So before, you may have had a more traditional functional structure. Now, for example, under new conditions, you have to have more of a matrix structure. It's more complicated, different relationships, different understandings, different accountabilities, and some of the management may not be able to cope. So how do you lead an organization that perhaps is not used to being held accountable or held accountable so much in the past, but now needs to be? So purpose, accountabilities, and then you come to the sensitivity of communication. How do you sell a message? How has this leader captured the nature of the tensions, almost the damaging experiences that people have had, and create a sympathy, an empathy? And from that empathy show that the idea on how to move forward, the solution has been well thought, it's evidence-based. The rethinking on purpose, again, is evidence-based and it's more forward-looking. And when you put all that together, you have a message that is really, if you like, acceptable, even highly motivating. But it still is those three things. It's purpose, it's structures, and it's how you sell the message. That's a very interesting one, because most people would concentrate on the competencies and capabilities of the people who are here and help make them more aware of the market dynamics, help them be aware of the new nature of competitive advantage. Funnily enough, that is consideration number two. Consideration number one is role. So you have a role, an undersecretary, a minister, chair of a private or public organization. In these circumstances, what is the role requirement? And once you are able to identify the contribution of the role, the nature of the role, the value of the role, the constraints, where the role will go wrong, what things have changed, you now have a parameter. And it is within this parameter that the person will operate. So if your role and your chair, and it's a very large public organization, what's the first requirement? The role must make sense of strategy. And it's the chairman's contribution to make role a strategy. So we know when there's big change, when we've got a big role, it's not necessarily executive in the sense of chief executive, but it's chair, it's sense making. Until somebody has stood up above everything else and made sense, how can we move forward? So when I was undertaking those studies, I always had two things in mind. Really rethink role. Has there anything changed in terms of role outside in the marketplace that we need to introduce internally? And secondly, within the new role configurations, what competencies, capabilities do we need? I suspect I'm a bit unusual in that most people would look at people first. But I've learnt from bitter experience, unless you know what the role is there, you can train people as much as you want, but then they enter into a situation where unless they're very clear about what they're doing, and they're all very clear about what they're doing, I could be clear, but many may not be, The only way we get clarity is to get roles clear. Diversity is one of the most contentious issues today. Number one, we're not too sure what it means. Number two, usually diversity has a meaning situation by situation, but it doesn't mean that the same diversity interpretation takes place. We are at a point where diversity should be directly linked to increased performance. The reality is we're not. We have on the one hand diversity for political correctness, and we have on the other hand diversity for increasing performance. So diversity, it's up to you to decide. It could be gender, it could be age, it could be ways of thinking, it could be color, it could be so many things. All that we know is we need different inputs and opinions. That's all diversity is. Different inputs and opinions. The question is which, where, and why? That is the answer that the chair must give, or the board must give. We do have political movements with diversity. It is in the gender area, it is in the race area, and sometimes it is to do with circumstances and situations. We are still working our way through it. Now, where you have diversity which takes on more of a political nature, you have two considerations. The first is getting there. So you're a woman. What's the population difference between males and females? It's 51% of female in the world, 49% of males. So we have more females than males. So on just that very simple basis, we should have more women on board than men. But then it gets to got there. Getting there is the political process of representation to get you to the point where you'll be considered. Got there means you've got a position on a board. The question is, are you the right person? Do you have the right background? Do you have the right experience? And what we seem to have done, but we're getting better at it, is that we've confused getting there with got there. So if we get more women on boards, things improve. I have to tell you they don't. It's as much a problem of having poor men put on boards, which happened in the past, as it is of poor women put on boards. I'll give you an example. In the UK, there is one region of the UK that has 50 health authorities. When I knew them 3-4 years back, 48 of the health authorities had male chairs, 2 had females. I knew them last year, and all of a sudden within 24 months we now had 48 of those authorities were female and only 2 were males. So I had to ask the question, that's smart work. You're very quick, you've changed everything so much. And you know, everybody told me it's fantastic and so on. And then I got a call privately from the chair of chairs. So we had 50 chairs and 1 chair above them all. And it was a lady. She said to me, we didn't tell you the truth. We have real problems. And the problems are, because of political correctness, we appointed females who should never have been appointed. What do I do? She asked me. And I said, well, why don't you live with it, because it's very sensitive, but you will face the consequences in 2 or 3 years' time. Or you start an approach, a disciplined approach of evidence gathering. Which of the chairs is the least performing? Which of the chairs is the most destructive? Which of the chairs is the least accommodating or least cooperative? And by evidence, you can build a case that that chair should be moved on and a new chair should be appointed. She never rang me back. And I could see why. She was very frightened. And I think frightened is the right word. She was too worried to raise a very uncomfortable issue that females who were supposedly good were not good. But I had to point out it has nothing to do with males or females. There were many males who were appointed who are not good. And there are many male chairs who are too frightened to face up to that situation. So it's normality. But the circumstances are we have not quite coupled diversity with performance. We're getting there, not quite. So you as chair have to tell me as a board member or me on the C-suite, what does diversity mean here? And the only concept of diversity that went right across the board was diversity of thinking. We need people, it doesn't matter whether they're male or female, younger or older, who have a point of view, who have an experience, who think in a clever, contributory sort of way. They challenge each other, but the challenge is positive. And those are the ones that we need on boards. So I think the answer is diversity of perspective. And what we did in UAE, we did in every country, including Saudi, but then across the world. We asked board members to rate themselves, including the chair. And there were 60 measures, and basically out of a score of 9, they gave themselves pretty good scores, like 8.4, 8.5. We did really well. We then went to the executives who did not sit on the board, but had something to do with the board. So you can imagine Director of Human Resources, Director of Strategy, Director of Information Technology. They have something to do with the board, but they don't sit on it. And we asked them, because they had to receive all the governance from the board, to rate the board. And they rated it low. In fact, out of all the countries, UAE rated their boards lowest. There was only one other country in the world, and that was South Africa. So if the UAE board members rated themselves 8.5, the managers rated them 4.9. Big difference, including females. And that was surprising. It didn't make any difference whether you were male or female. So I asked the question, why? Well, they said, you know, all the people sitting on the board are usually from a privileged background. And usually too many of them sit on boards. So the females are behaving exactly the same as males. You should have 2 or 3 board positions to do a good job, not more. Some of them have 11. How can you make any meaningful contribution? So they said it was a strange form of corruption. It wasn't that people were taking money, but the corruption was one of privilege of position. I'm somebody, I'm privileged, I sit on 11 boards, nobody questions it, everybody's frustrated. I've got a feeling there's a little bit of that here. Yeah, it's because you're privileged, you can sit on many boards. Does it mean you make a contribution? Not really. It's not. And you'll find here it's one orientation. You'll find in the UK it's a different orientation. There it's from background concerning school, university, even if you come from a trade union background, because trade unions equally create very talented people who go and sit on boards. They begin to sit on multiple boards. So instead of the board being an open area where people discuss some of the most difficult issues, it actually becomes a platform for status. All these people sit on this board, all these people sit on that board, and because you have this rotating element, once I finish with this board position, I'm usually attracted and asked to go on this board position. Most people don't challenge sufficiently, because if they do, they're out of the network. So you're absolutely right. Boards should be making a contribution, and they do. Should they be making a bigger contribution? They should. Why don't they make that bigger contribution? Because of the social reasons. And it's exactly here, AU, Australia, Britain, even worse in America. So it's different reasons, but the same fundamental source. 2 things, and I think these 2 things are fundamental. You must be very clear on the role and purpose of boards. Now, in a sense, we've had a long history, because it's basically from this part of the world that the first board started in ancient Mesopotamia, which is now in Iraq. 3,500 years ago, you had an oversight body. Hammurabi created a code. What's the role and status and duties of a king? What is the role and status and duties of the citizen? And so you needed a board to make sure that those codes were adhered to. And as we went through the various phases, every time in that governance phase, a board or equivalent of a board was created. So step number 1 right now, what is the purpose of the board? And fundamentally, it is oversight. We have a set of assets, we have a management team, we usually have some pretty good people, but the board's role is to say, can we extract greater value from these assets than we have so far? So, number one, do we train people to think this way? Because it's quite a clever job. You can imagine a major government department, a major corporation. Think of all the different departments, all the different bits to it. Why do we need them? Could we do it better? Could we make it more efficient? Do we need more bits? Should we acquire from other organizations? So number one, that intellectual skill is important. Because if you don't have it, how can I trust you? How can I know that you're credible? The second and the most sensitive is to be independent. And I'm talking here emotional independence. And as you said to me just a second ago, it's difficult. How can you go against someone of higher status in your society that you're likely to meet outside the boardroom in a social situation, and you say to that person, no, not this way, this way. So those are the two bits that every society has problems with. Do we have people of the sufficient intellectual power to analyze the value of assets? And secondly, do we have individuals of sufficient emotional strength to be able to have that independence of mind and say, perhaps you may be right, but is there another way? Let me offer you the other way. These issues in most schools are discussed, but they are not a topic to be taught. And I think if you taught these two things, and I can tell you how to break them down and how to teach them, you probably will have an advantage over most schools of management. It's not so easy to answer that question because, as far as I can see, there is not a glaring problem. You know, is there a problem in Oman? Well, not really. It's a bit like asking, is there a corporate governance problem in the UK? Not really. So we have a number of issues. And that, first of all, is good news. You don't have an overwhelming problem. It's not so basic. People have moved on. We have a more sophisticated circumstance. I think here still is the topic that we discussed, its status. It's trying to challenge individuals who sit on boards who have a bigger status than most and have that in-depth, meaningful conversation. That is a concern. The second concern is, to be honest with you, the linkage with government, but it's the same in the UK. So there are many companies that are trying to form linkage with government so the government can be a customer, the government can be a supplier, and there, that sense of independence is eroded. It's not sufficiently big enough. The other, which is equally here as it is in the UK, how do we train chairs? Now, that's a big problem. We train leaders, we train C-suite, you even have training for CEOs. But let me tell you, where is the training for chairs? You will find in London, you may have half a day with EY, a full day with McKinsey's, 3/4 of a day with KPMG, and that's it. Well, that's completely inadequate. The chair now is the most important role in any structure. It's not the CEO, it's not the creation of strategy, it is the delivery of strategy to the satisfaction of all stakeholders. So that makes the chair a very important position. What do? We underpay chairs. What do? You just appoint them, no training. So something that the Academy could think about is there a special category of people that require very specific attention, and they're called chairs? And in my view, there is. Again, it is a contentious issue, and again, I don't wish to be difficult, but again, it varies. There is one principle with sustainability, and you'll find that with the OECD, especially the OECD report that emerged last September. And they basically said, make a profit and then think about sustainability. I have to say and challenge the OECD, you're wrong. That is totally wrong. The sustainability that counts is the one before you make a profit. So the most important issue with sustainability is business sustainability. In other words, sustainability and competitive advantage are completely linked. So you're trying to form a competitive advantage that will have some life beyond the natural life you would expect. Once you've done that, we have sustainability on a much firmer platform. And there we can discuss all the other sustainabilities, the ESGs, and so on. But until you have business sustainability, which means sustainability and the making of profit, not having made a profit. Once the making of profit and sustainability are linked, we have a much better situation. We don't teach that. The OECD goes in a different direction. And I think the reason for that is they almost expect that, business does business, and then all the other things are an add-on. They're not an add-on, because once you make sustainability a consideration after profit, it's basically charity. What do you want to do charity for? I mean, I can give a little bit to sustainability, I might as well give a little bit to a theatre. That's not sustainability. So sustainability must be taught as the heart of business. Now, not many places do that, because part of that is attitude. Part of that is the way the top team thinks. Part of that is the way the team considers new energy sources, or not. And one of the concerns right now is you may consider new energy sources, but in fact we can't use them. They aren't available. So if you go into Europe, they're talking about green energy and so on. Do you know what they're doing? They're the one continent on Earth that is buying more coal than anybody else, because they simply don't have the energy. So we also have to get rid of the hypocrisy, which is important. But say from my point of view in a business, your point of view, commentating on businesses, when somebody tells you sustainability and profit and the way you make profit are linked, they've got the right idea. From what I have seen, it seems to be much better than the UK. In the UK, I am seeing much more manipulation, to be honest with you, which is a contract by the private entity with government. And usually the private entity knows that the contract that's been signed is unsustainable. So it'll reach a point where the budget is used up, which means now you ask government for a further budget, and you ask government for a further budget. So the budgeting process in the public-private partnership is a major concern. And I don't know whether the situation is political or not, and I think it is. We have to look as if this project is sustainable and profitable, so that in many ways the politicians will tick it off. And there's your problem. It usually is a third under budget. And where you have that honesty, and then the politician is involved in that honesty, and they're selling that to the public, you have a very good relationship. But in Britain, that's not the case. Well, first of all, small and private enterprises are the lifeblood. So if we go to another country, Germany, 80% of the whole economy of Germany is small to medium. Mittelstand companies. It's not the big Mercedes and BMWs and Siemens. They're a small part of the German economy. It's the small to medium-sized enterprises, 50 to 250 people. And the Germans have made absolutely great use of that. So whatever it takes to make a small and medium-sized enterprise work, whatever sustainability it needs, whatever investment it needs, the Germans go out of the way to do it. And that's what's needed here. You must have small to medium-sized enterprises, because you need the entrepreneur. Policing and care. Britain doesn't have it, and most other countries don't have it. In the kingdom, it works superbly. You should see the funding coming in, that people trust that this investment, be it a good or bad investment business-wise, the economy and the structure of government will respect that. And that's what's needed. And again, I'm slightly out of touch, but I don't see that here. Yes, we were looking across now 48 countries to try and identify what are the different governance practices, the different leadership practices. Is there a commonality? Is there not? And funnily enough, there are more commonalities. So at the level of strategy, many organizations at top team and board level do not agree on the way forward, on the vision, the mission, the strategy. And that is because of the complexities of the market, the different opinions in the C-suite and the board. And so we have infighting, which means the role of the chair is very important to try and work over that. I think the most worrying statistic is that when an organization faces problems, and this includes the cabinet of a country, as I noticed in the UK, when something is going to go wrong and that topic should be discussed, and especially if that topic is sensitive, people don't raise it. So if I go back to Enron, we go back to all the corporate collapses from the UK to Europe since 35 years ago, the same theme emerged. The board and the top team knew what was wrong. It was so sensitive to discuss. The board members felt so uncomfortable to raise it. The organization went bankrupt. And everybody on the board knew that was going to happen. So now I have even psychometric tests which will look at your capacity to predict the future. And the theme that has emerged from UAE, Saudi, through to Australia, is that if you feel so uncomfortable, you are able to predict bankruptcy 5.5 years into the future. And what happens in between? Nothing. Nothing at all. So when people tell me I didn't know, I can show them you did know. You didn't know what to do about it, true, but you knew. So we have now a way of operating to bring governance and leadership together. And what's the most sensitive part of leadership? The uncomfortable decision. And that always has been the most sensitive part of leadership. If you look at the images we have of leaders, they're of a big person, they stand up there, they're smiling, they're handsome, they're beautiful, all those lovely things. That's not a leader. A leader is the one, when they're really stretched, makes the uncomfortable decision and could even be unpopular. That's a leader. So we're trying to create that level of resilience and insight into people that you may be blamed sometimes, but you made the right decision. It was for everybody else. Unfortunately, you may have become a casualty, but that's leadership.